What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on? Happy Sunday night. Very happy Sunday night to the Detroit Lions, who get a massive win. 31-9. Destroy the Minnesota Vikings number one seed hopes in the second half. Fantastic game by the defensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn, who I'm sure, I'm recording this right after the game, will get a game ball in the locker room. Dan Campbell, the overall operation. What a night for the Detroit Lions. We'll give them their flowers off the top as well. And a guy who, listen, polarizing player, a lot of different opinions. There's no disputing how well he played this year. Put himself in a position to get a large contract, to stay as the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. Sam Darnold was atrocious tonight. I mean, he was really, really bad. So we'll dive into that off the top. That game, the Lions win the North for the second straight year. They went 15-2. They won 12 games last year, which is, they ended up having the best season in the history of the franchise. Won multiple playoff games for the first time in like 50 years. Then they came back this year and won 3 more regular season games with a half-injured defense. Just incredible performance by Dan Campbell. There's not much you can say that already hasn't been said about the big guy, because that what a night for the franchise. And, you know, a franchise, we'll dive into it. Some other stuff around the NFL, some owners that made some comments about their coaches going to return. I would say we're a couple wild card teams, and these owners are definitely a couple wild cards. So we'll hit on that, as well as just really briefly, initial thoughts. I honestly haven't really looked forward to this upcoming week beside just the matchups. I saw the lines at like halftime. One game really stands out to me that I think is just going to be tough for one team and could get really, really ugly. But before we dive into some football, I had someone either a DM or tweet at me that they already used my friends, the official ticketing app of this podcast, Game Time, on a pair of tickets to the Bills. They're going to a Bills home game. I've never been to a Bills home game, but I can't imagine during the playoffs with snow, with the cold, how much fun that is going to be. And listen, this is the start, if you're a Bills fan, for what you thought was last year, right? You got a home playoff game against the Chiefs in the second round, and you lost. Well, now you're going to have a home playoff game against Denver, and then ideally a home playoff game against the Ravens. So if you want to go to one of these playoff games, I've been to a ton of NFL playoff games over the years. They're just fantastic. They're so intense. There's so much on the line. It's a 7-game series in 60 minutes. I cannot recommend it enough. Obviously, if you're a big college fan, Ohio State, Texas, Notre Dame, Penn State, and you want to try to get to one of these games Thursday or Friday, download that Game Time app. They will take care of you. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Like I said, download that app, create an account, use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Let's start with the Lions, because there had been a lot of talk. Kevin O'Connell's the coach of the year. That's all I've been hearing. And listen, I didn't necessarily disagree. Done a great job. Resurrected Sam Darnold's career. But he got punked tonight. And he got punked tonight not just by a head coach, Dan Campbell, who resurrects the wrong word. The Lions were dead. They were an irrelevant franchise. They were a losing franchise. They were a place where players and coaches went to get fired and cut and have their careers end. The 2 best players in the history of the franchise, I would say in my 40 years of life, easily one of the most famous NFL players. They both retired at 30 years old. They both quit. They both said, no mas. It's one thing for it to happen to one guy, Barry Sanders. Then it happened to another, Calvin Johnson. And it was like Dan Campbell came in, guns blazing. Everyone's like, And even last year felt like, this was an awesome year. It was really fun. They had a chance to beat the 49ers. He kicks the field goal. We talk so much about the word culture, and I think it's such a fun conversation because there is no way to quantify it. There is no way to put it on paper or to you can talk about it as much as you want to another person. You can attempt to describe it all you want, but it is difficult. But you know it when you see it. And if you've been following football, you saw it for 20 years with the Belichick Brady Patriots. You've seen it for the last 5 or 6 with the Kansas City Chiefs. And this year it's been on full display with the Detroit Lions. Half their defense is on injured reserve. Broken legs, broken feet, broken arms, rolled ankles, hamstrings, you name it. Guys went down one after another. Thing that I love the most about football, and people think it's cliche, and coaches use this a lot, but it is so true. It's the ultimate team game. You need other units and the other side of the ball and other coaches to pick you up when you're having a bad game, when you're having a bad month, when someone gets injured. And for a long stretch of this season, the offense has carried the Detroit Lions. Ben Johnson, Jared Goff, and that total unit. Carried just last week on Monday Night Football. Think about that. The Detroit Lions played Monday Night Football 6 days ago, 5 hours away from where they just played a game. And Dan Campbell and everyone's like, why don't you just rest your guys? He's like, that's not what we do here. That is not the attitude, and that is not the way we've built this team. Not only did he not do it, he ended up gaining some momentum, getting a nice win against the 49ers in what turned out to be a shootout where his offense dominated and Jared Goff looked brilliant and their defense looked atrocious. But they got a couple big turnovers from Joseph, who tonight made an enormous play. It'll be a play that most people won't talk about. But Cam Akers busted a run. And at one point in time during that run, you're like, he's going to score a touchdown. And Joseph kind of corralled him off around the 10-yard line. But Akers still had so much momentum and even the angle to kind of push him out with the stiff arm. Joseph grabs his arm, pulls him on top. Honestly, like a lion on the Serengeti, jumps on his entire body, brings him down at the 5-yard line. Do you know what happened? They did not score a touchdown, as they didn't any time that they entered the red zone tonight. But that play, was very symbolic of something that would have happened over multiple decades with the New England Patriots. We never quit. We never give up, no matter what happened. And tonight, a team where everyone goes, God, their offensive coordinator is the apple of everyone's eye. He is the guy that every team wants to be their next coach. The next Kyle Shanahan, the next Sean McVay, the next Kevin O'Connell. And Aaron Glenn tonight, now he got Anzalone back, but with a group that is battered and bruised, missing several key starters and obviously their best defensive player on the sideline with a shattered leg, said, we are going to fuck you up. And in that first half, that game plan that Aaron Glenn had tonight that ultimately propelled them for their second division championship and honestly punked Kevin O'Connell and Sam Darnold. He blitzed over half the passes in the first half and was getting home at almost a 60% clip because he said, you know what? We can't just play regular defense. We just tried to do that last week against Kyle Shanahan, and they were averaging like 7 yards a play. We got no shot. I got to throw the kitchen sink at you, and we're going to be aggressive. And I'm going to call blitz after blitz after blitz. And you know what? The culture and the vision of this franchise and the way that Dan Campbell has led them for years now, they were ready to go. They were flying around from the jump. And obviously the defense was working. Tonight, the display by Aaron Glenn was as good of an individual display on defense as you've seen all season long. That was incredible to watch. And to me, Aaron Glenn, Dan Campbell, and then the second half, once the Lions kind of settled down, an incredible 4th-and-2 call to get Gibbs a touchdown to make it 17-9 from Ben Johnson just became a total team effort. It was like, it's on like Donkey Kong and we're just better than you. And especially at home in Detroit, we're not losing this game. And then 17-9 turned into 24-9, turned into 31-9, and a game that at halftime which was 10-6, and honestly just felt really intense. Just a classic kind of old school game. Minnesota struggling in the red zone turned into an absolute bloodbath. And, the floodgates opened, and we're going to look back at this box score and go, that was a one sided affair. And really, it wasn't because the defense kept the Lions in that game. Jared Goff, at one point in time in this game, before they scored a touchdown on that fourth down, had two interceptions and didn't have a passing touchdown because the only touchdown they had scored was a handoff to Gibbs on like an outside zone where he ran the ball in. If you would have told me at one point in time during the game he would have no touchdowns and two picks, and both picks were atrocious. One was, basically in Minnesota's red zone when they were backed up, which again did not lead to a touchdown. And the other one was just an atrocious middle of the field bomb that Harrison Smith picked off relatively easily. Jameson Williams wasn't even close. I would have said Minnesota's probably up 10 plus points. And it wasn't the case because of the defensive effort by Aaron Glenn. And when you're a head coach and when you're building an organization, it's about so much more than just draft picks where the Lions have crushed. I mean, how good is Anzalone? How good is Jameson Williams? What a young ascending player he's turning into. How good Laporta is. Jahmyr Gibbs ended this season with 20 total touchdowns. To put that into perspective, up until the last couple games last year, it was a legitimate conversation. Could Christian McCaffrey win the MVP? Before that epic meltdown, not by him, but Purdy and Kyle against Baltimore Ravens on Monday Night Football. And it all swung to Lamar. But Christian McCaffrey last year had 21 total touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had 20. I remember on draft night, how can the Lions take a running back at 12? How's that one aged? And also because they went from 6 to 12, they added Laporta as part of that. So what they've done with Jared Goff, how good their offensive line is, what a stud St. Brown is over the middle. But tonight was about the defense, the culture, the effort, the physicality, the violence in which they were playing with, the advantage they have at home. And it was a treat to watch. As someone who loves the sport of football, as someone who loves the business of football in terms of building the team, signing players, drafting players, building the coaching staff, that had to be one. I mean, you'd have to be really, really, really old. I would say the majority of Lions fans. Last year was really cool winning playoff games. That's about as cool of a night as you're going to have. To win 15 games, to send the Minnesota Vikings now on the road. And I right before I started this podcast, I saw Dan Campbell went up to Kevin O'Connell saying, "See you in 2 weeks." He's basically assuming that the Lions will beat the Rams. I wouldn't go that far. And then the Bucks will play the Eagles. But we got a long way to go to see how it all plays out. But that's a devastating loss for Minnesota because your quarterback, and listen, I'm not one to just like overreact on one game. You have a bad game. It happens. It happens to all good players. I mean, halfway through this game, Jared Goff looked like he was imploding. So football's really hard, especially on the road. But Sam Darnold was really, really bad tonight. Through the first half, he had overthrown, and Collinsworth mentioned this on the broadcast, overthrown, and that's his miss high, 8 passes. 8 passes. And after the first half, he was 1 for 9 for 3 yards inside the Detroit 10-yard line. That display that we saw in the red zone tonight was an abomination. And I saw a couple still shots of like Jordan Addison getting open. It felt like he was seeing ghosts a little bit. And it just felt like he was off. His rhythm, his timing. And he picked a bad night to have an awful game. And Aaron Glenn and the defense took advantage of it. But, I don't pivot off anything I've said throughout the season. He's earned that right. Every single human alive at the beginning of the season, with Sam Darnold being the starter, would have signed up for a season where he throws 33, 34 touchdowns and win 14 fucking games. Like, this season has been a wild success, but it won't feel like that if they lose next week. So the pressure of the night gets amplified throughout this week, and it's going to feel and be put on him because this is ultimately a business. And if he has another one of these games on the road with the LA Rams, listen, I've know the way these guys talk. I interact with a lot of them through text message. Like the conversation that GMs, the front office, they will have, things get weird and things get weird fast. I wouldn't necessarily pivot off two games, but that's the way sports, that's the way business often works. What is the latest bad or good taste in your mouth? And especially because they showed JJ McCarthy on the sideline, like if he has back to back games like this, one that cost them the one seed and one that gets them bounced from the playoffs, I would say everything would then be on the table. If he bounces back, they beat the Rams, he throws a couple touchdowns and looks like his previous self. I think this will be somewhat of an outlier. You lost the Lions on the road, not that big a deal. But next week, against a really good defense, a really good front, it's going to be hard. And he's got to shake this off fast because the guy we saw tonight did not look like the guy we had been seeing in the previous weeks. The guy we had just saw a couple weeks ago against the Green Bay Packers, slicing and dicing them, making just big throw after big throw. The guy several weeks ago we saw against Seattle throw that game winner down the sideline to Justin Jefferson. Tonight, he wasn't even close on the majority of his passes, and it cost him. Like to go into the red zone that many times with clearly one of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL. And listen, it's a failure on Kevin O'Connell as well. It's a team effort. Like the coaching staff from Detroit tonight, Flores did actually did a pretty good job. Flores was keeping them in there. Like you hold Detroit at home to 10 points at halftime, and you've been to the red zone multiple times. Like that's on Kevin O'Connell, not on Flores. But eventually the dam broke, and Flores' defense fell apart. Down the stretch, and obviously Jahmyr Gibbs started running down their throat. Goff hit some passes, and the rest is history. But you can't overcome when you're that bad in the red zone. It can't happen. So tonight, Kevin O'Connell, Sam Darnold, going to be a tough night sleeping. And listen, I'm not necessarily blaming this on Kevin O'Connell because I can't imagine like he was behind this, but clearly he's going to want to get paid this offseason. There was a report this morning by Jay Glazer that he's going into a contract year, and Minnesota hasn't talked to him about a contract extension. And sometimes coaches can be a little hypocritical because all they tell their players, the team, the team, the team. We focus on the team. We deal with business at another time. And then this story comes out. It's like teams could trade for Kevin O'Connell. It's like, listen, I hope Kevin O'Connell had nothing to do with it and honestly was pissed off because he should be. That's fucking embarrassing if anyone in Kevin O'Connell's world, his agent, any part of his like inner circle is pushing that story on the day of the biggest game he's ever coached. Like that cannot happen. Meanwhile, the Lions are in the hotel room, arm in arm, army paint, getting ready 10 hours away from the game, and Jay Glazer's talking about Kevin O'Connell getting traded. That's like Bill Parcells, New England Patriots shit, mid-90s. Like that cannot happen. And honestly, even if I had nothing to do with it, if I'm Kevin O'Connell, I would come out and be like, I am staying with Minnesota. That's not going to happen. Like this is like, coaches sometimes are no different than players. Clearly, I'm sure he's wildly underpaid. And then that story comes out and people would trade for him, which they would. Why would Minnesota ever let him go? He probably wants $15, $16 million, so it's going to be a contentious negotiation this offseason. But for that story to come out and then for you to get worked by Aaron Glenn, who is not even a head coach yet, but like legitimately kick your ass and embarrass you in front of, I'm sure, 15, 20 million people. Tough look. Like tough look. That's pretty embarrassing. Like if I was a Vikings fan, I'd be kind of pissed off. The story comes out and then it plays out like that, like especially offensively, like we're that big of a joke. I don't know, man. That one, that's gonna sting. For as awesome as that feels, if you're a Lions fan, it doesn't get any better. Like obviously winning the NFC Championship or winning the Super Bowl would get better, but just in terms of the last 50 years, for as putrid as the franchise been, the guys retiring at 30 years old, first ballot Hall of Famers, everyone constantly making fun of you, you guys being the butt of everyone's joke on Thanksgiving for most of our lives, to having that happen on Sunday night and working that guy who's everyone's like, Kevin O'Connell, he's Bill Walsh. It's like, no, we're going to blast your ass. And that's what we did. And Sam Darnold to just melt down like that, what a performance by Aaron Glenn. If I was the Lions, I would take his sheet, his game plan, and I would want to frame it and put it somewhere in the facility because that's a historic night for the franchise. It really is. And I think it's that much more meaningful given that obviously it's a divisional opponent who's had way more success than you over the years. Like that's a memorable moment for the defense. And same thing with the Gibbs, like the draft pick, the organization, Brad Holmes. Uh, that was awesome. I mean, that was sweet. So congrats to the Lions. Massive win, the number one overall seed. NFL playoffs. We're talking about the NFL playoffs. You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is a key to winning in the NFL playoffs. And the key to you scoring big is betting on them at DraftKings, the number one place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something as simple like a player to score a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Here's another reason to watch your favorite players crush it in the playoffs. New customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big during the NFL playoffs with the DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use the code JOHN, J-O-H-N. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Really quick, we'll just hit on the playoff games now that we know them. Everyone knew this was going to take place. Like, this was the biggest lock in America that on Saturday afternoon, the Chargers would be playing the Texans. And I think I like the Chargers in this game, though I haven't thought that much about most of these games beside one. But everyone knew Texans, Chargers was a lock for Saturday afternoon. Steelers, Ravens. I don't think there's any human being, and I mentioned this on Saturday night, that can view Mike Tomlin and the Steelers having any chance against Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh. I feel this thing's about the final score is going to look a lot like this game Sunday night. I would expect it to be like 35-10, 28-7. Like I just don't think this thing is close. And Saturday night, prime time, Steelers, man, I don't see how they keep it close. Broncos at Bills. Anytime Buffalo hosts a playoff game, feels like they host a lot of Sunday morning Wildcard Weekend playoff games. They hosted one last year. 2 years ago, they hosted the Dolphins in this spot. So this is kind of the Bills morning spot with Nance and Romo. The afternoon, I think, will be Brady and Burkhardt. Packers, Eagles. Packers, I don't know what's going on. They had some injuries. Christian Watson got hurt today. Jordan Love got banged up today. So we'll have to monitor their injuries. This game is actually pretty interesting. Props to Baker Mayfield, who threw a bunch of touchdowns this year, led his team back to the playoffs again, hosting the Commanders and rookie sensation, my bald brother, Dan Quinn. It's just a solid wild card weekend playoff game. And then the Rams. The Rams now have hosted this Monday night playoff game multiple times. A couple years ago, Kingsbury, they played that game against Kyler Murray. I think if I remember correctly, they kicked their ass, but they're hosting the Vikings. That's a pretty good game. Earlier this season, I think on a Thursday night, the Vikings went out there and lost. So I got to dive more into these games. I briefly looked at the lines. Obviously, the Bills are big favorites. The Ravens are big favorites. The Ravens feel like I'd be stunned if that game's close. Honestly, I really would. Chargers, Texans, could see that thing being close. I think it's going to be hard for Bo Nix to go on the road to Buffalo and be competitive. The Packers, listen, something's off with the Packers. I'd be stunned if the Packers win that game. Commanders, Bucks, no really thoughts. In the Rams, Vikings, I gotta take a deep breath off what I just witnessed, because sometimes in football, this isn't baseball or basketball. You don't get to play every day. We don't have that much data, right? Just once a week. And that it's hard to get those images of Sam Darnold airmailing people all over the field. I could see, Kevin O'Connell, who's a Sean McVay guy, little advantage Sean McVay there. So they're going to need another big game out of Flores to keep him in it. But other than that, a couple other quick things. Jim Irsay, I saw this clip of Jim Irsay. I don't know. It wasn't a wheelchair. It was like this stand-up thing with wheels, and he was kind of sitting on it. Honestly, it looked like a like Joe Biden or something getting wheeled around. It was a pretty tough scene coming out of the locker room. And he had said, I don't know if he told reporters that both Jim Irsay, or excuse me, that Chris Ballard and uh, Shane Steichen will return. Again, when you see this visual, you go, I'm not sure Irsay's got a lot going on there. So I think the Colts have been a very controversial team over the last 10 days after McAfee put that out, after they had that gutless loss to the Giants. I think it's even above those two. I think their owner, who's always been a kook, I think physically, he was in the hospital a while back. I think it's all falling apart. And I think this organization's got a lot of issues. I mean, big picture, their quarterback got hurt early in the season, tapped out of a game in the middle of the season. Now his back issues. He's crawling around his house. Like I don't know what the hell they do. I really don't. I mean, I feel for Colts fans because I don't think there's a light at the end of the tunnel right now. And Stephen Ross, who once wanted Flores to tank so we could get Joe Burrow, who I've always defended for that move because it just was the right move. Said that so you never know with Stephen Ross, like he can change his mind. I guess same thing with Irsay. Though I don't even know if Irsay's the one putting out these statements. Could be his kids. With the Dolphins, I'm gonna take them at face value. They put out a statement saying that Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel will return. So basically, as we sit in here on Sunday night, we're essentially waiting on the Cowboys. Jerry, I was actually in my last night before I went to bed. I just uh, couldn't really sleep, so I watched the last episode that I had missed a Landman, and Jerry Jones is in the show. He actually does a pretty good job. Like it was, I remember looking at Maria. It was like 11:30 at night. I'm like, I think that was a pretty good scene with Jerry crying, talking about his family. Felt a little more like coherent than he often does when he's on the radio or giving a locker room speech to the Big Jays. But he's a wild card. I mean, your guess is good as mine with that situation. We know Doug Peterson's going to get fired. No one gives a shit about the Jags. The Giants, obviously up in the air. Schefter, like, kind of did this thing I guess Chris Mortensen used to do about leaning whether guys were staying or going. And he was basically leaning with the Giants and the Cowboys that both guys were going to stay. The Raiders would also be a team to keep an eye on. But Mark Davis, not all these teams operate at the same pace. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens. I don't feel as confident that beside the Jags, there's going to be a ton of action tomorrow. I mean, there could be, but there also, I'm not going to be surprised if there is not. So we'll just have to buckle up and wait and see.